So what made you move from these documentaries to making your first features, The Householder?
Well, while I was editing The Delhi Way in New York, and I had already decided that I needed to go back to India to do some more work on it because I wasn't completely happy with everything I had and I wanted to do some more things. And while I was editing it, I met Ismail Merchant. And he had come to see, he came to a screening of The Sword and the Flute, which was the film on Indian miniatures. And he saw that and he was very impressed by it. He just came up and talked to me. And he was on his way back to India, and he had already had an idea about making feature films in India in English for the international market, which is something that had not ever been done in India. And he was convinced that there was a big, you know, there was he wanted to do that. And I was on my way back to India, and when I got back to India, he was going to make a film like that in English with some other Americans, and then it fell through. And then he just suddenly decided, since he had read one of Ruth's novels, The Householder, that, well, why don't we make that?
And I think
that's how it started.
I think you described it as like being thrown into a river in terms of your experience.
Yeah, well, you better swim.
you just
well, we all were the same way. He had produced a theatrical short in the United States, which was nominated for the Academy Award. And so he had that behind him, and he was a person with a lot of nerve. And so he thought, well, you know, he had this plan of making English language features in India, so this was going to be the first one. And he was not, if he had trepidation, he certainly didn't show it. And I don't know, at that age you just do jump into things without thinking about it too much. And Ruth Jhabvala was the same. And we said, well, we want you to write the script. And she said, but I've never written a script. And he's never directed a film, and I've never produced a film. So what? So it's okay. Really, it was as simple as that, in one little conversation.
Can you remember what it was like on the first day on set? Because you had a Bengali crew.
Well, it was not so much the first. Well, I can remember, yeah, a lot about the first day on the set, but it was the night before the first day. There were two things that worried me. One was that we went to the station to meet the crew who'd come from Calcutta with all their equipment, and they all came together. And this was the crew that normally worked with Satyajit Ray, but he wasn't making a film just then, so I was able to borrow his entire crew and cameraman, Subrata Mitra, and they all arrived on the train with masses and masses, mountains of boxes and things. And we went to the New Delhi station and to receive them. And I was thinking, this has now gotten very serious, and I wonder whether, should I be doing this? But it was a bit late to turn back. And the other thing that worried me was that with the arrival of Shashi Kapoor, to play the part of the young man in the film. And he was, you know, a young, incredibly handsome young movie star, Indian, from the Bombay film world. And he didn't really physically much resemble the character that Ruth had written about. And I remember pulling Ruth aside and thinking, or saying, maybe we should call this off, maybe this is wrong, and he's not at all the type. And though I'd met him, and she was enchanted with him. So she didn't want her Prim anymore. She wanted the Prim that Shashi was going to do, and so did everybody else. I mean, they loved him in that film, and we made many more films with him.
And didn't you do two versions? You did a Hindi version.
We did a Hindi version and an English version, and we did them simultaneously. I mean, every shot was done one way or the other. Not always. Sometimes we would do the English one first, and sometimes the Hindi one first, depending on the fluency of the actor in either English or Hindi.
Yeah, it sounds like a real headache. I mean, what's your
well, I had very good people to help me, and one of the young leading lady, Leela Naidu, her Hindi was not so great. And I didn't know, but everyone pointed this out right away, and she knew it. And so we had to be very careful, and there were lots of takes and this kind of thing, and in dubbing we made corrections and so forth. Just things of, she normally spoke English, but she had to speak Hindi, fluent Hindi, and I think, you know, there were lots of people to help me and say this is, and that's been true all my life because I've worked in several different languages, and luckily I've had help from people who do know.
And you've worked with so many great names, Indian, well, Leela Naidu anyways is one of the great beauties of Indian cinema, but the people that the actors that you work with, do you always get on with them?
Usually, no, usually I do. In most cases I do.
Yeah.
I mean, most actors are dying to do a good job, and the only time you don't get on with them is if they feel you're a hindrance to them doing a good job, then which can happen, and then you don't get on with them.
And you've worked with a lot of actors who are right at the beginning of their career, and we were talking earlier about Shakespeare Waller and Felicity Kendall, who looked. I watched that again the other day, and she looked so adorably fresh and young, and she can't have been more than about.
Well, she was 17 when we started out, and she had a birthday during the film. Yeah.
Was she already experienced as an actress?
Oh yes, she was part of the Shakespeareana company, and she'd gone around India with her parents and her sister, and had performed a lot.
Yeah. And that was the film that brought you recognition, wasn't it, internationally?
Shakespeare Waller, yes, it was. It was a kind of a lucky film, and it had a very, I mean, the story was interesting and new, and it was in a lot of festivals, and then did terribly well critically, and one of the great helps was that the music had been composed by Satyajit Ray, so you know, it was a good start. It wasn't the actual start, that had been the Householder, but it was Shakespeare Waller that people really enjoyed very, very much.
And another film we were talking about earlier, not your own film, but was Renoir's The River, and we were talking about how significant that was as one of those films that other filmmakers look at. We talked also about The Bicycle Thieves as being these films that filmmakers are inspired by.
So key films, yeah. Well, I saw The River when I was a student at USC, in the USC Film School, and I saw it when it had its first release in Los Angeles, and I was just thrilled by that film, and thrilled by the sight and sounds of India and so forth. But I had no idea that, you know, in a few years I would become so immersed in that myself. But yeah, it was. Though, of course, when I got to India, I said to my Indian friends, "Oh, I saw this wonderful film," and they said, "Oh, you must mean Patra Panchali." And I said, "Well, I saw that, yes, but I saw The River, and it was such a wonderful film, and they didn't like it that much." And Renoir, according to them, had done a lot of things wrong, and as only a foreigner could do. And yeah, I heard that, and so.
Yeah. And you were talking, I think, is it Satyajit Ray? There's a scene where he's playing sitar in the river, I think.
But no, it wasn't Ray playing the sitar. It was my cameraman, Subrata Mitra. And he actually, he was a sitar player, not professional or anything, but just he learned to play the sitar and loved to play it. And one day Renoir had heard him playing it, saw him, heard him, and wanted to put that music into The River. And it's the music over the opening titles of the original version of The River, and in which sort of lacy white patterns are being traced on the floor for something or other. And that's, you hear Subrata's sitar music over that.
Yeah. A lot of your films, you really evoke the past beautifully, and particularly we think of the evocation of the British Raj. I wondered when you look back, looking at India now, it's interesting because when the distance between, say, now and the period that you were there in the 60s is almost
That's the
same.
past. It is the past.
Yeah, and did in your last film would have in India would have been Heat and Dust?
It was Heat and Dust,
which is in the early 80s. So
early 80s, right.
That in itself is quite a long time span, and I guess that I think I first went to India in about 82, around about that time, and the changes that have happened in that time is immense. But I wondered if you could just talk about the sense, the feel that there was of the Raj when you were making films in the 60s, because you go to these places like the palace in Udaipur or the Glen Eagles Hotel up in Shimla, and you get the sense that there are these places where even the staff are still the same from 20 years ago.
It was still there. It was still very palpable, and people were alive, and people were still, I mean, a lot of English people were still working in India, and they had, their lives were there, and they were still there, and all the things that everything associated with them, all sorts of businesses and hotels and every kind of thing, and the kind of social life and clubs and certain kind of restaurants and hotels especially, all that was still very, it was still intact and when I first went. But now it's really gone. In fact, there's certain places where you have fake British Raj hotel suites and things, as in Bangalore.
Your films are really pick up the detail so well. I mean, what degree do you involve yourself in the art direction?
Well, I wanted originally to be an art director, and when I went to university, I started out in architecture school. But in time, I decided I wanted to be a director, and so I'm always I'm very much aware of the settings and the locations for my films, and I tend to find them myself, or if someone has found them, they tell me about them, I go and see them, and it's always been very important to me. But I can't, I'm not such an expert on a lot of these things that I'm not the person who really knows. One talks about detail in films. It's actually the people who do, for instance, design the costumes and know all about the costumes, make the costumes, or the people who have a very good understanding of hairstyles down the centuries and so forth. They know, I didn't know. I mean, I don't. You learn from your own films. I mean, now I think I know a lot, but I certainly, and we've worked in so many different periods, you actually get that from your crew. And because they're specialists, and particularly in this country and Italy. I mean, they have a fantastic knowledge in this country and in Italy also, and what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah. Talking about this country, I mean, I've spoken to people who are not real film people who assume that you're British.
Yeah, well, no one would think that if they heard me speak. So,
I think looking at your
but unfortunately, when I go to Europe, a Frenchman wouldn't know from the accent. They would have no idea, so they always assumed I was British. I was always but I was the most American of the British. How was it? I was the most British of the American directors when they finally got it in their heads that I was American. So.
Do you have any questions from the audience?
If you were going to make a film about India again now, what would the theme be, you think?
It would be about music. I always wanted to, and we did in fact make a kind of film about music in India, which was The Guru. It's a film of ours that very few people know about or have ever seen. But I think that's what I'd want to do, something about music.
The Guru was starred Michael York, didn't it?
Yeah, Michael York was in it, and Utpal Dutt playing the Guru, and the actress Rita Tushingham was in it, and all kinds of people.
Yeah, and this was the subject.
Madhur Jaffrey was in it, and the same girl that you saw in this film, Aparna Sen, she played the Ustad's younger wife.